They say you can pinpoint the exact moment when someone's soul cracks open on television. It happened on a Tuesday night in 1973, on stage one of NBC's Burbank studio, under hot lights and before millions of viewers who thought they were tuning in for laughs. What they witnessed instead was something far more powerful and infinitely more human. They watched Dean Martin, the unshakable king of cool, the man who never let them see him sweat, completely fall apart in Johnny Carson's guest chair. And they watched Johnny Carson, the master composer, the man who could navigate any awkward moment with a perfectly timed joke, struggle to hold back his own tears as he watched his friends shatter in real time. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This wasn't acting. This was a man drowning on national television, while another man desperately tried to throw him a lifeline. What happened that night in 1973 would change how America saw both men forever. It revealed the terrible price of fame, the weight of the mask we all wear, and the beautiful courage it takes to let someone see you broken. This is the story of the night the laughter died, and something far more important took its place. This is the story of two men, of friendship, and the moment when being real mattered more than being cool. The mask that never slipped. For 2 decades, Dean Martin had perfected an image so complete, so polished, so utterly convincing that even his closest friends sometimes forgot it was performance. He was a drunk who never stumbled, the ladies' man who went home to his family, the comedian who made it all look effortless. On stage with Frank Sinatra, he played the lovable lush, nursing a tumbler what everyone assumed was whiskey but was actually apple juice. He would slur his words just enough, lean on the microphone stand with practiced nonchalance, and deliver punchlines with that sleepy, half-lidded gaze that suggested he just rolled out of bed and onto the stage without a care in the world. America loved him for it. In a decade marked by Vietnam, Watergate, social upheaval, and economic anxiety, Dean Martin was a comforting anachronism. He represented a simpler time, a cooler attitude, a way of moving through the world that suggested nothing could touch you if you just kept your drink full and your tie loose. His variety show was a massive hit. His records still sold millions, and his live performances packed rooms in Vegas. He was untouchable, unflappable, eternally amused by the chaos around him. But beneath the tuxedo and the tan, beneath the perfectly coiffed hair and the practiced smirk, Dean Martin was carrying a weight that would have crushed a lesser man. His second marriage to Jean Beager, the love of his life and the mother of 3 of his children, had just ended in divorce. After 24 years together, after building a life and a family, it was over. The details were private, as Dean kept everything private, but those close to him knew he was devastated. Jean wasn't just his wife. She was his anchor, his home base, the one person who knew the real Dino Crocetti from Steubenville, Ohio, not the manufactured Dean Martin from Hollywood, California. The divorce left him unmoored. He moved into a house on Mountain Drive, high in the hills above Los Angeles, a sprawling place with too many rooms and too much silence. He would walk through it at night, a drink in hand now for real, not for show, and wonder how he had arrived at this moment. His children were grown or growing. His oldest son, Craig, from his first marriage, was making his own way in the world. His 3 children with Jean, Claudia, Gail, and his pride and joy, Dean Paul, whom everyone called Dino, were teenagers now, navigating their own lives, splitting time between their parents' homes. Dino Jr. was the one who kept Dean going. The boy was everything Dean had hoped to create: handsome, talented, athletic, charismatic. At 16, he was already a tennis prodigy, playing in junior tournaments and dreaming of Wimbledon. He had his father's easy charm, but none of the melancholy that sometimes crept into Dean's eyes when he thought no one was looking. Dino was pure sunlight, and Dean would stare at his son with an expression that mixed pride, love, and something deeper, a kind of grateful wonder that he had managed to create something so perfect in an imperfect world. But in 1973, with the divorce fresh and painful, with the house too quiet and the nights too long, Dean Martin was running on fumes. The act was getting harder to maintain. The smile required more effort. The jokes felt heavier on his tongue. He still showed up, still performed, still delivered the goods, because that's what professionals did. But the cracks were forming in the armor, tiny fissures that would soon become fault lines. The setup, a regular Tuesday that wasn't. Johnny Carson's Tonight Show was the undisputed king of late-night television in 1973. To appear on Carson's couch was to receive a blessing from the high priest of American entertainment. Johnny could make or break careers with a nod of approval or a raised eyebrow. He was sharp, quick, and devastatingly funny, but he was also fundamentally kind. Unlike some hosts who treated guests like props in their own comedy routines, Johnny knew how to listen, how to give space, how to let a guest shine. He respected the craft because he was a craftsman himself. Dean Martin had been on The Tonight Show many times before. He and Johnny had a rapport built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They were both professionals who understood the game, who knew how to give the audience what they wanted while protecting something essential within themselves. They made it look easy because they had both spent decades learning how to make it look easy. On this particular Tuesday, Dean was scheduled as the lead guest. The booking had been made weeks in advance. Dean's publicist had confirmed. The network had promoted it, and the audience was primed for an evening of smooth banter and effortless charm. Dean Martin and Johnny Carson together meant laughs, stories, and that intangible quality that made for great television, chemistry. But when Dean arrived at the studio that afternoon, something was off. The staff who greeted him noticed it immediately. He was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. The easy smile that typically lit up his face the moment he walked through the door was absent. He moved through the pre-show routine mechanically. Makeup, wardrobe, a brief meeting with the producers to go over talking points. But anyone paying attention could see that Dean Martin wasn't really there. He was somewhere else, somewhere dark and far away. Johnny Carson noticed it too, in his dressing room. Going over his notes and preparing his monologue, Johnny received word from his producer that Dean seemed subdued. Johnny frowned. He had known Dean for years, had socialized with him at industry events, had played golf with him on sunny California afternoons. He knew the difference between Dean's public persona and the real man underneath, and he knew when something was genuinely wrong. During the commercial break before Dean's entrance, Johnny made a decision. He would go gentle. He would give Dean space to be whatever he needed to be that night. If Dean wanted to joke around and keep things light, Johnny would match that energy. If Dean wanted to go deeper, Johnny would meet him there. That was the mark of a great host, the ability to read the room, to adjust on the fly, to put the guest's needs above the show's needs. The Tonight Show band played Dean's signature song. The audience erupted in applause. The curtain parted. And Dean Martin walked onto Johnny Carson's stage, carrying the weight of a world he could no longer hold. The interview begins. Everything and nothing wrong. At first, it seemed like vintage Dean Martin. He strolled out with that familiar loose-limbed grace, waved the audience with a lazy flick of his wrist, and settled into the guest chair with practiced ease. He and Johnny shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and the audience settled in for what they assumed would be another entertaining segment with two masters of their craft. Johnny opened with safe material. Talk about Dean's upcoming shows in Vegas, a funny story about Frank Sinatra, some gentle ribbing about Dean's golf game. Dean responded with all the right beats, delivering the expected laughs, playing his part. But those watching closely, and Johnny Carson was watching very closely, could see the performance for what it was. Dean's timing was still impeccable, but there was a hollowness to it. His eyes, usually dancing with mischief, were dull. His smile, usually so effortless, looked like it required tremendous effort to maintain. Johnny kept things light for the first few minutes, sensing that Dean needed time to warm up, to find his footing. They talked about show business, about the changing landscape of television, about mutual friends and shared memories. The audience laughed in the right places. The band played stings at the right moments. On the surface, everything was going according to plan. But beneath the surface, something was building. Johnny could feel it. Dean was holding something back, something enormous and painful, and the effort of holding it back was making him brittle. Every laugh seemed forced. Every anecdote seemed rehearsed. Dean Martin, the most natural performer in show business, was working hard, and when Dean Martin had to work hard, something was desperately wrong. Then Johnny made the decision to shift gears. Later, he would say he didn't know why he did it, that some instinct told him to go there, to open the door and see if Dean wanted to walk through it. Maybe it was compassion. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the bond between two men who understood each other in ways their audiences never could. Whatever the reason, Johnny leaned forward slightly, softened his voice, and said something that changed the entire trajectory of the evening. "How are you doing, Dean?" "Really doing." It was a simple question, the kind people ask each other every day without expecting or wanting a real answer. But the way Johnny asked it, the weight upon the word really, made it clear he wasn't asking for the performance. He was asking for the truth. Dean's face changed. The mask slipped, just for a second, and Johnny saw something flicker across his friend's features. Surprise, confusion, fear, and then something that looked dangerously like relief. Dean opened his mouth to deliver another joke, another deflection, another layer of protection. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, his mouth closed. He looked down at his hands, and the silence stretched out, seconds that felt like hours, while millions of Americans watched and wondered what was happening. The moment the dam broke, Johnny waited. The audience waited. The cameras kept rolling. And Dean Martin, the man who never let them see him sweat, started to come apart at the seams. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. It was quieter, rougher, stripped of the smooth polish that had defined his career. You know, Johnny," he began and then stopped. He cleared his throat, started again. "You know, it's funny how you can be surrounded by people, by noise, by all of it, and still feel completely alone." The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They weren't sure what they were watching, but they knew it was something real, something unscripted, something that didn't belong in the comfortable confines of late-night television. Johnny nodded, encouraging him without words. Dean continued, and with each sentence, the floodgates opened a little wider. He talked about the divorce, about how he still loved Jean, about how he didn't understand how they had gotten to this place. He talked about his children, about how proud he was of them, about how terrified he was that it failed him by not keeping the family together. He talked about waking up in that big empty house on Mountain Drive and not recognizing his own life. And then he started talking about Dino Jr. His voice changed again when he said his son's name. It cracked just slightly, but enough that everyone heard it. "That kid," Dean said, and his eyes were shining now. Wet with tears he was fighting desperately not to shed. "That kid is the best thing I ever did. Everything else, all of this." He gestured vaguely at the stage, at the cameras, at the trappings of his fame. "It doesn't mean anything compared to him." Johnny Carson, who had interviewed presidents and movie stars, who had sparred with the sharpest wits in the business, who prided himself on never losing control of the show, felt his own throat tighten. He had children. He understood what Dean was saying on a level that transcended entertainment. Dean kept talking, the words pouring out of him now like water from a broken dam. He talked about the pressure of being Dean Martin, about how exhausting it was to be cool all the time, to never let anyone see the fear or the sadness or the doubt. He talked about feeling like a fraud, like everyone expected him to have all the answers, when most days he couldn't figure out the questions. He talked about loneliness, about the specific kind of isolation that comes from being famous, where everyone knows your name, but nobody knows you. And then, in a moment that would be replayed and discussed for decades, Dean Martin looked directly at Johnny Carson and said, "I'm tired, Johnny. I'm so goddamn tired." The tears came then, despite his best efforts to hold them back. They rolled down his face, catching the studio lights, and Dean didn't bother to wipe them away. He just sat there, crying on national television, while Johnny Carson watched with an expression of profound sadness and empathy. Johnny did something then that broke every rule of television. He reached across the desk and put his hand on Dean's shoulder, not as a host to a guest, but as a friend to a friend, and in a voice that was barely above a whisper, a voice that the microphones barely caught, Johnny said, "I know, buddy, I know." When the professional becomes personal, the control room was in chaos. Producers were frantically signaling to cut to commercial, to end the segment, to do something to rescue the show from this raw, unscripted emotional breakdown. But Johnny Carson ignored them all. He kept his hand on Dean's shoulder and let his friend cry. The audience didn't know what to do. A few people started to applaud, not in celebration, but in support, a way of saying, "We're here, we see you, it's okay." Others sat in stunned silence, witnessing something they had never expected to see, a legend vulnerable, an icon broken, a man behind a myth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, Johnny made the call. He looked directly into camera one and said, with a calmness that belied the emotion of the moment, "We're going to take a break. We'll be right back." The stage manager signaled a cut. The red lights on the cameras blinked off, and suddenly, stage one of NBC Burbank was no longer a television studio. It was just a room with two men in it, one of whom was in tremendous pain, and one of whom was trying to help. What happened during that commercial break became the stuff of Hollywood legend, though few people knew the full story. Johnny stood up from behind his desk and sat down in the chair next to Dean. The audience, unsure whether to stay or go, remained seated, watching this private moment unfold. Stage hands and crew members who had seen everything in their years in television stood frozen, not wanting to intrude but unable to look away. Johnny didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He just sat there with Dean, occasionally squeezing his shoulder, occasionally handing him a tissue. At one point, Doc Severinsen, the band leader, walked over and put his hand on Dean's back. Ed McMahon, Johnny's loyal sidekick, brought Dean a glass of water. The whole Tonight Show family circled around one of their own who was hurting. Dean eventually got himself together, wiping his eyes and attempting a self-deprecating joke about ruining his makeup. Johnny smiled at that, recognizing the instinct to deflect, to rebuild the mask. But Johnny also knew that something important had happened, something that couldn't be undone or walked back. When they came back from commercial, Johnny made another choice that defined his character. He didn't pretend the breakdown hadn't happened. He didn't try to jolly Dean into performing again. Instead, he spoke directly to the camera and, by extension, to the millions of people watching at home. "I think what we just witnessed," Johnny said carefully, "is something rare and valuable. We saw a good man having a hard time, and we saw him be honest about it. That takes more courage than any performance." The audience applauded again, and this time it was thunderous. Dean looked up, surprised by the response. He had expected judgment, pity, embarrassment. What he got instead was something he hadn't felt in a long time: acceptance. The audience wasn't applauding Dean Martin, the entertainer. They were applauding Dino Crocetti, the human being. Johnny pivoted then, with the skill of a master, steering the conversation to safer waters without dismissing what had happened. They talked for a few more minutes. Nothing deep, just two friends chatting. Dean's voice was still rough, his eyes still red. But there was something lighter about him now, as if the weight he'd been carrying had lessened slightly simply by being acknowledged. When the segment ended and Dean stood to leave, Johnny stood with him. They embraced, a real embrace. Not the show business air kiss kind, but a full, tight hug between two men who understood something profound about each other. The audience gave Dean a standing ovation as he walked off stage. He waved, smiled that sad, tired smile, and disappeared behind the curtain. The aftermath, when vulnerability becomes strength. In the days following the broadcast, NBC was flooded with mail. Producers expected backlash, complaints that Dean Martin had made viewers uncomfortable, demands that entertainment remain entertaining and not stray into messy reality. What they got instead was overwhelming support. Letter after letter praised Dean for his honesty, thanked him for showing that even legends struggle, and expressed gratitude for the reminder that vulnerability isn't weakness. The industry reaction was more mixed. Some old-school entertainers felt Dean had violated an unspoken rule, that the public should never see you sweat, that personal pain should remain private. Frank Sinatra, Dean's best friend and fellow Rat Pack member, was reportedly concerned that Dean had damaged his image, that the king of cool had abdicated his throne. But others, particularly younger performers, saw it differently. They saw a man brave enough to be real, to strip away the facade and show the human beneath. For Dean himself, the experience was both liberating and terrifying. He had spent his entire career building walls, maintaining distance, keeping the real Dino hidden from view. In one unplanned, unscripted moment, those walls had crumbled. Part of him felt exposed, vulnerable, worried about how it would affect his career and his reputation. But another part of him, the part that had been screaming silently for years, felt relieved. Someone had seen him. Someone had witnessed his pain, and the world hadn't ended. His relationship with his children deepened after that night. Dino Jr., watching his father's appearance, understood something he hadn't fully grasped before, that his father was human, fallible, struggling just like everyone else. It created a new kind of respect between them, a bond forged not in perfection, but in shared imperfection. The Tonight Show episode was never rerun, but it lived on in memory and in bootleg recordings that circulated among industry insiders. It became a teaching moment in broadcasting schools, an example of what happens when television stops being a medium and becomes a mirror. Johnny Carson rarely spoke about it publicly, but those close to him knew it was one of the moments he was most proud of in his career, not because he'd been funny or clever, but because he had been kind. The legacy of One Broken Night. Dean Martin's career didn't end after his breakdown on The Tonight Show. In fact, in some ways, it was reborn. The veneer of invincibility had been cracked. But what emerged from those cracks was something more valuable: authenticity. His performances after 1973 had a depth they hadn't possessed before. He was still cool, still charming, still the consummate professional. But now there was a knowingness to it, an acknowledgement that the cool was a choice, not an inevitability. His relationship with Johnny Carson remained strong until the end of Johnny's Tonight Show tenure and beyond. They never did another formal interview quite like that one, but they didn't need to. They had already said everything that mattered. In later appearances, Dean would sometimes reference that night, usually with a joke, but there was always an undercurrent of gratitude in his voice. Johnny had given him permission to be human, and that was a gift beyond measure. The night Dean Martin fell apart on live television taught America something it desperately needed to learn, then and now. It taught us that strength and vulnerability are not opposites but partners. It taught us that the people we admire, the legends we idolize, the icons we assume have it all figured out are just people, scared, confused, doing their best with the hand they've been dealt. It taught us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you're not okay. In a culture that increasingly demands perfection, that punishes any display of weakness, that expects public figures to maintain impossible standards of composure and success, Dean Martin's breakdown was revolutionary. It said, without words, that you don't have to be okay all the time. It said that asking for help, showing your pain, letting someone see you broken doesn't make you less. It makes you real. Johnny Carson's response was equally instructive. In an age of snark, of gotcha moments, of hosts treating guest pain as entertainment fodder, Johnny showed a different path. He showed that you can be professional without being heartless, that you can control a show without controlling a person, that sometimes the best thing you can do is simply bear witness to someone else's suffering without trying to fix it or exploit it. The tragedy of Dean Martin's story is that the pain he expressed that night in 1973 would return, amplified 1,000-fold, when he lost a beloved Dino Jr. in 1987. The son he spoke about with such pride and love would die in a plane crash, and Dean would never fully recover. In the years between that Tonight Show appearance and his son's death, Dean had some good years, some moments of genuine happiness. But the seeds of his eventual withdrawal from life were planted in the loneliness and exhaustion he expressed to Johnny Carson that Tuesday night. Looking back, we can see that appearance as a warning sign, a man trying to tell the world he was drowning. Some people heard him. Johnny Carson heard him. The thousands of viewers who wrote letters heard him. But the machinery of fame, of expectations, of show business kept grinding forward, and Dean kept performing, kept smiling, kept playing a role until the day came when he couldn't anymore. The final lesson. So what do we take from the night Dean Martin fell apart on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show? We take the reminder that everyone, no matter how successful or talented or beloved, has moments when the weight becomes too much. We take the lesson that reaching out, even in small ways, can make a profound difference to someone who's struggling. We take the understanding that being real, being vulnerable, being honest about our pain doesn't diminish us. It connects us. Dean Martin was the king of cool, but that night in 1973, he was just Dean, just a man, a father, a person trying to navigate divorce and loneliness and the crushing pressure of living up to an image. And Johnny Carson, who could cut the commercial, who could have made a joke, who could have smoothed over the awkwardness, chose instead to be present, to be compassionate, to be human. In that choice, Johnny gave Dean and all of us watching permission to be imperfect. He showed us that sometimes the most professional thing you can do is forget about being professional and just be a friend. The ratings for that episode were good, not exceptional. It didn't win any awards. It was never officially released on DVD or streaming platforms. But it mattered more than 100 Emmy-winning episodes because it was true. Today, when we watch clips of Dean Martin crooning that Amore or trading zingers with Frank Sinatra, we're watching performance. But on that Tuesday night in 1973, on Johnny Carson's stage, we saw the man. We saw him broken and brave, hurting and honest. We saw him fall apart, and we saw him held together by the simple presence of a friend who cared enough to ask how he really was, and then cared enough to listen to the answer. That's the legacy of that night. Not the tears, not the breakdown, but the connection. Two men, a friendship, and the courage it takes to let someone see you when the mask finally falls away. In a world that increasingly feels disconnected, that moment of genuine human connection across a television desk remains a beacon, reminding us that we're all just people doing our best, hoping someone will be there when we need them most. Rest in peace, Dean. You were the king of cool, but you were also something far more important. You were real. And Johnny, thank you for showing us what true class looks like. It doesn't look like perfect composure and witty comebacks. It looks like a hand on a friend's shoulder and the willingness to let your own heart break while you help hold someone else's together. That's what we remember. That's what matters. That's the night the laughter stopped and something far more beautiful took its place. The simple, profound gift of one human being seeing another and saying, I'm here. You're not alone.